All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is our fourth community meeting, and it seems like I haven't quite gotten some of these things down, but I think I've got us sorted out now to get started. I am Carmen Bishop in the Zoning Administration Division, and welcome. This is a meeting about the Data Centers Zoning Ordinance Amendment. And I'd like to introduce Janan Cato. She is also with Zoning Administration, and Janan will be helping to moderate this session. And then we also have Tracy Strunk, the Director of Department of Planning and Development on the line, and excuse me, Katie Herman with the Planning Division as well. So I am going to get us started with a few slides. And while I work through the slides, please keep your microphones muted, but there will be plenty of time for comments and questions after the presentation. As we go along, of course, you're welcome to use the chat function as well, and we will try to work through all the questions that are in the chat when we get there. And I should note that we are recording this presentation, and we will be posting the recording afterwards. And the slides are actually already posted on our webpage. So our review of data centers began following a board matter from last May. And based on the direction from the board between May and January, an interagency staff team, we worked together and we did research on data centers. We met with various stakeholders. We held a community meeting such as this. We also presented to Planning Commission and board committee meetings. And then that work resulted in a report that was issued on January 9th. And then following that, there was a discussion at the board's Land Use Policy Committee meeting on March 12th of near-term enhancements that could be made to the zoning ordinance to strengthen the standards for data centers. And then following that, that was put into a board matter that directed staff to get started on a zoning ordinance amendment and to bring that amendment to the board by July. And then, so that zoning ordinance amendment is the subject of this meeting. And we have prepared draft text along with a summary of that text, and that's posted on our project webpage. And then I'm going to be walking through. I see a comment. I'm sorry, I'm stopping because I see a comment that came up that said that somebody was having trouble with the audio. Can other people verify that you can hear me? You are? Okay. All right. Okay, great. All right. I'm sorry. I hope that person, maybe you could try joining on by phone. Sometimes I know if computers aren't working, the phone will work. So I'm going to be walking through the draft text that we have posted in this presentation. Now, this is the last of our community meetings for the zoning ordinance amendment. But tomorrow evening, the Planning Commission Infrastructure Committee will be discussing the amendment. That's shown on channel 16, so you can tune in for that. And then there will be a Planning Commission public hearing on June 5th and a Board of Supervisors public hearing on July 16th. So the zoning ordinance regulations would apply to a data center that's the principal use, not an accessory server room. And this is where typically where all or most of the building is designed for the express purpose of housing computer servers with their network connections. And as you can see by the images on this slide, data centers, they come in various sizes and appearance, and their technology is continuing to evolve as well. They can range in size anywhere from maybe 30,000 to 500,000 square feet. They can be developed as individual buildings or a campus development style, and then they employ different cooling and other technologies as well. And it is anticipated that the demand for data centers will continue to expand because they are a critical component of our modern lives. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of background about data centers as part of this presentation, but if you are interested, there is background information on data centers and topics related to their potential impacts in that January 9th report that I mentioned. So currently, the zoning ordinance does allow data center by right in the C3 and C4. Those are commercial office districts up to 40,000 square feet in size, and in the I2 and I3 industrial districts up to 80,000 square feet in size. And then in all four of those districts, that those sizes can be exceeded with either repurposing of an existing building or with special exception approval. The zoning ordinance currently allows a data center by right in the I4, I5, and I6 industrial districts, and then also in certain planned districts when it's shown on the approved development plan. Now, in addition to the permissions and the use-specific standards, any use has to meet all zoning ordinance regulations. And on this slide, you're just seeing the bulk regulations for those districts that allow data centers. And so you can see in the industrial districts, they generally have a 75-foot height limitation. And then to exceed that height, or in the I3 through I6 to exceed the FAR, that can be approved with a special exception. And then there are other zoning ordinance regulations that apply as well, including parking, transitional screening and barriers, open space, outdoor lighting. And then the county has a separate chapter of the county code that is a noise ordinance. The current use standards for a data center include the size limits that I mentioned before, as well as a requirement for all the HVAC equipment and generators to be fully enclosed. And this standard does not currently apply in the I4, I5, and I6 districts. All right, so now moving on to the draft text for the amendment and beginning with the permissions. Looking at that top table, you'll see that the permissions are adding an SE for I4, I5, and I6. And this pairs with the standards, and I'll just ask you if people can keep their microphones muted so we don't get feedback. The SE for I4, I5, and I6, that pairs with additional use standards that I'll be going over in just a moment, and would allow for certain of those standards to be modified with the special exception approval. Now, in the lower table, you're seeing a couple different options. Option one shows that we are removing the permission for a data center in the PRC district. There aren't any existing or approved data centers in PRC, and the only other industrial uses allowed are craft beverage production and small scale production, and both of those are to include a customer focus that would be compatible with a town center or convention conference center areas. Now the text also shows that the plan district permissions are revised from what you see here as the check. That means it needs to be shown on the approved development plan, revised to SE. And that is because sometimes the proffers broadly allow all or most uses that are allowed in the zoning district. And so this is one way to make sure that that location was specifically planned for a data center. And then I want to note that as directed by the board, all the options for permissions would be advertised for consideration. The draft text includes revisions to that current standard for enclosure of the equipment. The revised standard would apply in all districts, including the I4, I5, and I6. It's also revised to indicate that the purpose is to provide visual and noise mitigation. It would apply to all HVAC equipment, generators, as well as accessory electrical substations. And then the standard is also revised to acknowledge that certain types of cooling systems aren't mechanically feasible to enclose. And I'll just say that that is as defined by the manufacturer specifications, but the standard that we've written, it would be as determined by the director of LDS. So LDS would be verifying those manufacturer specifications. And so if the equipment just can't be fully enclosed, then the standard requires that there would still be a screening wall to provide that visual and noise attenuation. Now, no changes are shown to the maximum sizes for C3, C4, I2, and I3. But the I4 district is added to the standard that would limit the size of a by right data center to 80,000 square feet. And then we have some different options shown in the draft text to either remove the allowance for by right repurposing with a larger size, or to maybe add a maximum size for that by right repurposing, such as 200,000 square feet. No maximum size is shown for I5 and I6, and this is in order to encourage data centers to locate in those heavier industrial districts. The draft text includes it includes a setback for the building or for the equipment, such as the generators, from a residential lot line. And the text includes a 200-foot setback, but it does provide for consideration of up to 500 feet. The 200 feet, it's based on a review of other use-specific setbacks in the zoning ordinance, such as a barn for livestock or poultry with an agricultural operation, an extraction activity, that's a quarry, or a crematory. The text also includes a setback of a half a mile from a metro station entrance, and this is because those areas are planned for high population and employment centers, and then both of those setbacks could be modified by SE. Now, of course, the zoning district setbacks, they continue to apply as well, and we also have the transitional screening that I mentioned before. Transitional screening is a requirement for a landscaped buffer between dissimilar adjoining uses. And transitional screening, it was recently amended as part of an overall update to the landscaping and screening provisions in the zoning ordinance. And as part of that, it was increased from 35 feet to 50 feet between industrial and residential uses. And that is the largest transitional screening yard in the zoning ordinance. Now, to ensure that data centers are doing the upfront planning needed to make sure they will comply with the county's noise ordinance, the draft text includes submission requirements for a noise study to be submitted with a rezoning or an SE, and also before site plan approval. So this will apply to by right developments as well. And then again, a post-construction study before issuance of the certificate of occupancy. The draft text also includes building design standards for by right development. This would include a main entrance feature, facade variation, and fenestration, that's windows and doors. And then we have a more flexible standard that would apply for a rezoning or special exception application, because architectural renderings would be submitted for everyone to review. So here you have a diagram that shows what the by right standards could look like in the I5 or I6 district. This is showing a 75-foot high building, a 200-foot setback from the building on one side, from the generators on another, 50 feet of transitional screening, enclosure of equipment. You can see an entrance feature on the building, and then that fenestration that I mentioned as well. So as I mentioned at the beginning, this meeting is focused on the zoning ordinance amendment for data centers as authorized by the board. But I want to note that a separate review of the comprehensive plan, policy plan, it is getting underway. The board has authorized staff to amend the entire policy plan with a focus on land use and the environment in phase 1. And then as part of that amendment, staff could include additional considerations for data centers. And that would apply to those that are reviewed through a rezoning or a special exception process. And the website for the policy plan amendment is here on this slide. And I understand that initial community engagement is starting that this month. Now, there are certain topics for data centers which the county does not have regulatory authority to address in the zoning ordinance. These would include energy efficiency, the sodium that could be in cooling water discharges, or air quality emissions. it is possible that these topics will be further considered as part of that policy plan amendment. Now, currently, though, within the comprehensive plan, we have an existing Appendix 12, and that's in the policy plan, and it has performance criteria that are used to review special exceptions for data centers that are on industrially planned parcels, and the criteria ensure that proposals are compatible with surrounding uses and take into consideration several environmental topics. And so that is the end of my slides. I do ask that you stay muted until we call on you, and then you can unmute and ask your question or just make a comment. But a few reminders. As I mentioned, this is our last of our community meetings on this zoning ordinance amendment that is scheduled, but it is all posted if you want to go back and take a look at the slides or anything. And there's the Planning Commission meeting tomorrow evening, and then the public hearings on June 5th and July 16th. And I'll just mention that the Planning Commission Infrastructure Committee meets at 8:30 tomorrow night. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And I don't know if anybody has any questions yet.
Thank you, Carmen. Nobody has their hand raised, but we do have a question in the chat. The zoning districts have various size limits. For context, can you provide a general size range of most data centers? Are there many data centers being built that are only 40,000 to 80,000 square feet, or are much smaller data centers being anticipated to be developed in the future?
So those are good questions. I think we are seeing, data centers in various sizes. A lot of the newer ones that we have been seeing applications for in Fairfax are larger. There was one recently approved that was around 400,000 square feet. There are some that are coming in that are less than or around 250,000 square feet. But even though we are seeing those larger buildings, I don't think that it precludes that there could be new ones coming in that are smaller. There's industry reports of something that some people refer to as edge data centers, which could be smaller. We do have some smaller ones in Fairfax, I should say, but I think they're a bit older. But so that's kind of what we're seeing right now. But I think that what I have learned is that it's an evolving industry, and there could be different formats that could come in the future.
Thank you, Carmen. We have a Sonia in the chat. I'll invite you to unmute your mic.
Hello, hi, Sonia Brehe. I wanted to ask, there's two questions that I was curious about. One is they're not allowed within a half mile of metro stations because there's the recognition that those areas are intended for sort of mixed use, transit oriented communities. But I would almost ask, like, it seems to me like it should be even further from metro, because even beyond the half mile, I would say between, and beyond, you're going to see increased amounts of housing and residential because of the metro system. And that is where we should be having our housing close to metro. So allowing data centers in that space, even, between the half mile and a mile, seems to not really utilize the metro system as best we can. And so I wonder if there's opportunity to expand that so that it's further than the half mile from transit station areas. The other question I had was about the diesel backup generators. I think those can be really problematic for air quality, sound, and so I guess I wonder how, you pointed to the policy plan as an opportunity to update some of these other features of environmental sustainability and whatnot, but why can they not be included in the zoning? It seems really an important feature not to have diesel generators close to our residential areas and we should be thinking about how we zone for that. So I'll stop there. Those were my two sort of front of mind thoughts.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. On the diesel generators, so they are regulated by the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, and they do need to get permits by the state. So in that way, the state has preempted local governments from regulating emissions further. So they are regulated, just not by the county. So yeah, they definitely are regulated, and they have to get permits for that. And I think one encouraging note, perhaps, that I hear that newer data centers are more likely using the tier 4 generators, which are much better than the tier 2 generators that previously were widely used. So hopefully that'll be the case, but in any event, they do need to get the DEQ permits. On the distance from Metro, we showed the half a mile as a proposed distance, and that is tracking with our comprehensive plan, which provides for increased densities within a quarter mile, and I think tapering out to the half a mile. So that was where, I think the areas are more intended for the walkability and so forth. And I don't know, there are some other people who actually know a lot more about that than I do here on the line, if anybody wants to elaborate.
Yeah, Carmen, I'll hop in. Tracy Strunk, thank you all for coming. I'm the director of the department, and in a previous life worked in the Tysons area and on the Tysons plan a lot. So I would also say most of our high intensity development that Sonia was talking about is going to be in a P district. So that's going to fall by its nature into the more highly reviewed the higher review process as part of that development. So what we were trying to capture in some of this, and in particularly, I'm sorry, apologize for using jargon. Thank you for that, Lisa. P district stands for planned district, which is our districts that have a lot more flexibility in control up front when they're developed, but they go through a higher review process and they have a lot more expectations. So on the back end, they're tied down to a lot more details, but they have some more flexibility up front, but they all go through a rezoning process. And those are the zoning districts that would allow some of that higher intensity development that we're talking about in those transit station areas. So one of the things with adding the regulation, and Carmen can let us know after I'm done if there is flexibility in what that specific distance might be. If the board could make some different decisions about what that actual decision distance would be. But the idea is that there are some areas in Tysons in particular and along the toll road that are still zoned industrial. And so the idea would be to capture those areas in terms of needing a special exception. Sort of the example that we've sort of thought about is of another use that is not highly active at the ground floor is like mini storage type use that you would see. And those are uses that are could work in an urban area if the building is, say, wrapped with another use. So that was the idea, that there might be something that we could look at that would work in one of those transit oriented areas, but it would be a very sort of new particular kind of design for that kind of thing. So hopefully that was not too jargonish, and let me know if I missed any other acronyms there. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. And Whitney, I'll invite you to unmute your mic if you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. Let me take care of that problem. Sorry, I forgot I had trouble signing in at first, and I have two going. Okay, so I'm with Friends of Homes Run, and one of the concerns that we have is the environmental impact. I realize that what you're talking about today is slightly separate from that, but I think one thing I'm learning, the more I look into the Bryn Mawr Plaza 500 data center, which is going to be in Cameron Run, the mother watershed, if you will, to ours, is it kind of is like a total illustration why data centers should always be requiring a special exception and never be by right. Because in that case, yes, it's zoned I3 and I5, but it is also surrounded on at least two sides by homes, and the by right would be, as currently proposed, within 90 feet of homes. And then the other aspect is right across the line in the city of Alexandria, there would be a mixed use planned there. So that is a reason I think that it's not like all I5s or all I3s or all industrial was thought of in terms of, you know, this being compatible. So since that particular site is 80% in the RPA, and it's already severely encroached by existing impervious surfaces that have contributed to not one but two streams being badly degraded, it seems to me that that's a cautionary tale, and that this legislation, I mean, ordinance zoning redo that you're thinking of needs to include those kinds of situations somehow, capture it, filter it, that kind of situation. So it cannot happen like that. So because it's by right, the county therefore has limited itself by allowing that particular data center, not that they knew necessarily was coming, but because it's by right, the developer can basically do much less in terms of minimal, stormwater improvements, for example, environmental improvements, because it goes through that separate sort of process. So that's just a comment. But the other thing I have is a question. Once a data center is built, we're concerned about the thereafter, like code compliance. I mean, how would environmental compliance be assured? We've certainly seen, it's even difficult with a construction site for people to have eyes and ears on what's going on, and to capture before it becomes a pattern or a problem. So I will be wondering who will be reporting to whom about what, and how will it be responded to, because you've got noise, you've got stormwater, you've got waste management, you can just pick, it could be a heat island. So all of these things are something that I don't think are academic. I think they're, last thing I'll say, and it's just a comment, I'm not against data centers as a whole. I mean, I just think that this is a particular type of situation that needs to be filtered for. And since the data centers are privately owned and operated, it kind of reminds me of like a get rich quick, where people are really into it all at once in the marketplace, and then eventually there'll be a glut, and then you're going to have all these quote unquote white elephants, stuck with you. So anyway, those are my comments and my questions.
Okay. Thank you for that. I do want to say that, as I mentioned, as far as permissions go, all of the options will be on the table for consideration by the board, for SE or not. But, and as far as like stormwater management, the county we have a stormwater management ordinance and other layers of regulation, Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance. So there are layers of regulations that apply to any development, whether it's a data center or a warehouse or whatever. So those will continue to apply. They're just separate from the zoning ordinance. And I don't know if there's anything else in there, but
so when you say it'll be applied, so a by right with a property that's 80% in a resource protection area, give me an example of how that could end up on the benefit on the side of this stream protection, which is so close to the Potomac, and it's two different stream systems.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that the stormwater management regulations, they apply regardless of the use, because it doesn't matter. It's not a data center specific thing. It could be developed for another use and could have the same or even more impacts. So it has more to do with impervious cover and so forth. And so those are separate standards and they still apply.
And as far as the, who keeps their eyeballs on, like if I'm a neighbor and I can imagine that I might complain about a noise, by the time you get out there, the noise is resolved, I mean, if it's the code compliance folks,
yes,
which is do they have experts who are experts on these kinds of uses? Do they have manpower or human power, I should say? where they, would they be able to prioritize when there is a complaint so it doesn't take too long to get to, because it affects,
Yeah, absolutely. We do have the Department of Code Compliance that enforces the zoning ordinance. And I know that as part of the permitting process, there's also inspections required as far as that goes.
Thank you, Carmen. We have a few people with their hands raised and a few questions in the chat as well, and I'll do my best to address them in order. So I'll start with Diane. A question in the chat. Why is it proposed to reduce the setback with special exception?
So we often, when there's a standard that, we think there should be, a setback, but is there a way to modify it? There might be a way for a data center to be designed or given that specific location that a lesser setback would be appropriate. But that would need to go through the special exception process, which means it's going to be reviewed by the Planning Commission and ultimately approved by the Board of Supervisors. So it's part of a public hearing process, and it's in that case then reviewed to ensure that it's in harmony with the comprehensive plan. And of course, it has to meet, other provisions of the zoning ordinance. So sometimes that type of flexibility is appropriate within, that entitlement application.
Thank you. Another question in the chat from Candace. Do you know what information these data centers are hosting, protecting, storing?
Maybe this meeting. Yeah, I don't. I think everything.
Yeah. All right. John, I'll invite you to unmute your mic.
Yeah, my question is really simple. Are there any maps that show?
We can't really hear you well, John. Your voice is kind of far away.
Okay. I'm trying to get closer here. Is this better? I'll just put it in the chat.
All right, thank you. Gabe, I'll invite you to unmute your mic.
Hi, thank you. The question that I had asked, that I was thinking of asking, was briefly mentioned, which is planning if the data centers become less useful. If you look at office space that's been built now, a lot of it is sitting empty and a lot of it can't be repurposed for housing, something like that. It's hard to imagine right now the need for data centers decreasing, but that could happen. And it would be a shame if all these buildings were built only usable for data centers and were eventually decommissioned and just sat there empty. Is anything being planned and required for looking ahead just in case the need for data center declines? What can be done with them?
So that was something that we were working on the research report that we did. We looked in to see if any other jurisdictions maybe have decommissioning requirements for them. And we really didn't find that at this point, that anybody has decommissioning requirements for them. But I appreciate your thought. I think that's something that we might have to continue to learn about in the future.
Thanks, Carmen. We have another question in the chat from Sonia. Similar to transit areas, how are activity centers addressed? And how close can data centers be sited to those?
I am wondering if maybe somebody else who knows the comp plan better than me could help out on that.
I'll jump in again. This is Tracy Strunk. I would say that it would be there's not a specific there's not a specific limitation, so it would be based on what the zoning is. Again, in the activity centers, for the most part, higher intensity and new development is coming in through those planned districts that I've mentioned. So they would be generally captured then. And we don't necessarily see the same industrial, although there's a whole lot of, there's a whole lot of variability across the county, but in general, the activity centers probably have a little bit less of, and maybe I shouldn't be going out on a limb and saying that, but so the basic answer is it would be addressed through the permissions in the zoning ordinance that would be in those areas. And the activity centers, as opposed to like a metro station that is a real point in time, point in space, I guess, that we can tie a limitation to. Don't necessarily, like each activity center doesn't necessarily have a point in the center the way a metro center would be in the center of a metro transit station area.
Thank you, Tracy. And Lisa, I'll invite you to unmute your mic.
Hi, thank you. I have two quick questions. The first one is, why does Alexandria even consider having data centers in our neighborhoods in the area? There's so much space out around Loudoun and Woodbridge at this time. They don't need to be close by. So it seems like in our neighborhoods, we wouldn't even consider doing that. And my second question is, I'm already hearing from neighbors who are considering moving. And if that were to happen, then it seems to me this is going to become an economically disadvantaged neighborhood if people don't want to live here at all. And, that always invites crime. We seem to have a good mix right now of people in various economic situations. It's concerning in that way as well. I guess that's not really a question, just a point to make. That's it. Thank you.
And I appreciate your comment. I do want to say that the board's direction on this amendment was to strengthen the standards for zoning ordinance amendments, and so that's what we're hoping to accomplish with the amendment, so that they are directed to the right places and developed in ways that they fit within our community.
And can you speak about why are we even bringing them here when there's land further out that's further away from neighborhoods?
And I think, we can see certainly Loudoun County has a lot more than Fairfax and Prince William, and data centers are locating further out. But that doesn't mean that Fairfax County zoning ordinance shouldn't accommodate it as an industrial use. And it currently does accommodate it as an industrial use. And this is, just trying to strengthen those zoning ordinance standards for that use. I mean, the county, to my knowledge, isn't bringing in data centers. They are private development, just like any other industrial use, whether it be, a warehouse or a wholesale facility or anything else.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you. Okay, there's a question in the chat from Tyler. Can Carmen respond to Tracy's comment as to whether the Planning Commission and board has the ability to expand the distance from Metro?
We will need to, look at our advertising for that and try to make sure that that's possible.
Thank you. Okay, Lily, I'll invite you to unmute your mic. Lily W., you have your hand raised. Okay, no response from Lily. Okay, we have another question in the chat from Commissioner Cortina. You mentioned that sodium can't be addressed by the zoning ordinance. Stormwater only addresses phosphorus pollution. Sodium is only one byproduct in the concentrated washdown discharged from liquid cooling system. Can the zoning ordinance standards require discharges from liquid cooling to the wastewater or stormwater pre-treat the water, particularly in the water supply overlay district?
I might need you to unmute and repeat some of that. That was a lot.
Yeah.
So, you know, I know that for when the cooling water is discharged to the wastewater system, and I know that we currently don't allow bromides, but there's no enforceable standard for the sodium, which was the concern that was identified. And I wish, and I guess I should say a potential concern. And it's my understanding that the county, in partnership with the Occoquan Monitoring Lab, I might not have all of that name correct, is looking to do some additional analysis, maybe later this summer, of the different contributors to that, to try to really find out, who really is contributing to that in the wastewater. But if I or anyone else can help answer that, or if you want to unmute and speak to that some more, that'd be good.
Sure, Carmen. This is Mary Cortina, and I read your report with interest. I thought it was an excellent report in January. And my concern with the by right situation is that in the case of liquid cooling, which is more energy efficient than air cooling, and would be a strategy to reduce, let's say, the impact of the carbon footprint of a data center and the amount of energy it's using, that the byproducts, once that wash goes through, the liquid cooling goes through a certain number of times, all those gallons of water, and then it has to be refreshed with new water. And the old water goes into somewhere, and I don't know that I completely understand how that water is discharged. And there would be necessarily no requirement to pre-treat, which we could do in a SC situation. So I'm concerned about this, particularly in the water supply overlay district, just not understanding what's in that water and whether it's being discharged into the streams, what's in it, what the impact is. So I think the zoning ordinance is an appropriate place to indicate that any liquid cooling systems that discharge into the wastewater, stormwater system, that they pre-treat the water. And if we need some more research, I think, I think somebody needs to be researching that.
Yeah. And I might need to touch base. We had some members on our interagency staff team from the wastewater planning, and I might need to loop them in to get some additional response on it. But while I guess in theory they could discharge to a stormwater system, my understanding is that they are all discharging to the wastewater system. And there are, of course, there are permitting requirements that are in place. It's just that as part of the current standards, there isn't there, while the EPA has a health advisory standard for sodium, and UOSA hasn't set a standard for the sodium, that we just don't have an enforceable limit on sodium. That doesn't mean that there are no requirements at all. It just means that that was one constituent of concern that was kind of outstanding as a possible concern. And not even necessarily like some of the, as I understand, some of the newer evaporative cooling systems are not actually discharging to the wastewater system. So, but I can definitely loop back in some of our members from DPW and see if I could get some more information for you on that.
Perhaps we could take another look at that, and there's a standard that says that you can't, for example, discharge to the stormwater system, or we'll tease this out a little bit more, but I'm interested in that component. Thank you.
Lily, I'll invite you to unmute your mic.
Hi, I'm
Thanks
sorry.
so much.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was finagling Microsoft Teams a little bit earlier. But my name is Lily Wong. I am a resident of the Bren Point community. First of all, Carmen, Tracy, thank you all for kind of, taking the time to share all of this information with us and hearing our feedback here. You mentioned that you all want to encourage developers to kind of build in those I-5 zones, which I guess works in concept, except, for all of the other use cases, like myself and some of the neighbors that I know are also on this call here. Our residential areas happen to be right by the Plaza 500, which is zoned for I-5. And so as you can see, this data center is planned to be more than 400,000 square feet, which is way larger than the 80,000 square foot recommendation that I've heard again and again. And so, I know that the point of all of this is for the board and the county to kind of review and revise and strengthen some of these standards to ultimately help residents and the people who live near these kinds of developments. And so I guess my question, and this is a point, I'm trying to voice a point of concern, which can follow into my question, which is, how can we work together with you all to kind of ensure that, these regulations are actually helping residents, especially people like myself who would get hit the hardest in this case?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what to say. I'm sorry. Was there a question? I appreciate, your comment, and that there are places in the county where residential is next to industrial. And that's part of the genesis for some of the proposed standards, including a setback from residential, screening of equipment, enclosure where possible of equipment, doing that noise study up front and again before the certificate of occupancy, and the aesthetics. I mean, so, the standards are, intended to try to help mitigate impacts when there are these situations of residential somewhat nearby to industrial properties. And then that's where, we appreciate this meeting, and any additional thoughts that you all have for how to go about that.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't have a really a pointed question there. I really just wanted to kind of raise awareness around, it's a good idea to have data centers, zoned to one specific area. I-5 was mentioned, but just wanted to raise the flag that there are I-5 zones that are, right next to actually a lot of residential areas. And so really, if we're trying to review and strengthen these standards, maybe let's also just consider that there are use cases like this, where people need protection and residents need protections. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll invite Jade Arslan to unmute their mic and ask their question. I also see that you have a question in the chat as well. I don't know if you want to articulate your question in the chat over voice.
Hi there. First of all, thanks so much for holding this series of meetings, and they're very instructive. Thanks. One of the things that really concerns me about the proliferation of data centers is that we're not looking at infrastructure capacity. Just like you wouldn't put a super high rise on a road that is already gridlocked. Why is Dominion, why are we not considering the amount of electrical capacity that we have? We don't have any. We don't have any for years out. Yet Dominion is being allowed to oversell its ability to provide electricity for these businesses. And we will eventually pay for it with our rates. And this is going to increase cost of living in a time when everybody is concerned about keeping costs of living down. And so I really don't understand how this really critical piece of infrastructure is not being factored into where we're placing them. You know, is there a substation nearby so that, you know, we wouldn't have to be running lines, new lines, creating new substations in areas that aren't afflicted with these huge industrial structures? I mean, how much is our landscape going to change? How much are we going to be impacted in our cost of living because of the need for these businesses to make profit and for the county to increase its tax base? At, you know, at a certain point, there comes people. It will no longer be a desirable place to live, and it will no longer be an affordable place to live. And all these diversity, equity, and inclusion caveats that are being built into the policy plan are basically just going to be window dressing and go out the window. I was out driving around. I had to take a friend out to Winchester the other day, and driving back home, I was so struck by the change in the landscape. And I understand that that things are going to change, and we are in an area slated to be the, you know, data center capital of the world. We're already that. But at what point does that overtake citizens, neighborhoods, and the reasons why we moved to Fairfax County? There's going to be a tipping point, and I think that electric infrastructure is one of the big ones because of the structures that are needed to support that. So again, thank you for holding these hearings. Thanks.
I guess the only part I do feel like I want to comment on that is this is a community input meeting with staff, and we really appreciate you taking your lunchtime to spend it with us and talk about this important topic. These are not hearings, so if you want to participate in hearings, those are before the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. So you'll need to do that as well.
Well, thanks for the clarification. Sorry. I still would like my question to stand about why isn't electrical capacity included in assessment of infrastructure? Thanks.
Yeah, so it is my understanding that we don't have zoning ordinance regulatory authority for that. You know, the planning for the electricity and is given to utility companies, and the SCC is involved, but it's not something that we can address through zoning.
There's a question in the chat from John. Are there maps that show where in the county that data centers currently can be built, and also a map that shows where the proposed changes, the impact of the proposed changes?
So the county has some different mapping applications that are available online. I would suggest using the zoning district analyzer. It allows you to turn on and off each individual zoning district. So if you just wanted to know, say, where I-5 and I-6 are, you could turn those on and then either put in an address search or just zoom around within the county. So that would be one way.
Okay. We also have a question from Diane in the chat. Would data center placement be considered, would the proximity to child daycare or preschool facilities be considered with data center placement? There's a church with a daycare and preschool in the industrial area near me, so it might be adjacent to industrial. So
I guess a couple thoughts. If it was within a residential district, and sometimes those uses are approved by special exception in an R district, then the setback standard that we have would apply, because it's written to apply to the zoning district as well as a residential use. And then the other standards, you know, they apply regardless of who's around. the noise ordinance, although the noise ordinance, I will say the decibels that have to be met are geared to the use or the zoning. And so that would come into play, meeting the noise ordinance, and then the screening and the aesthetics, of course, you know, that just, it helps across the board.
I'll invite Candace to unmute her mic.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for holding this meeting. I did have a question that I don't think was addressed as yet, and then I have a follow-on. How can we ensure that a minimum of 1 mile distance at the minimum of these substations, data centers, lines, and everything are at least at the very minimum a mile distance from the metro station and I guess any of these residential areas? And also for the second one, is there a way that you guys can find out how much radiation is emitted from these data centers and the impact to the surrounding areas, especially if it's less than 200 feet from neighborhoods and homes? Thank you.
So as part of our research that we did previously, we didn't identify radiation as an issue, so I really can't speak to that. And then as far as the 1 mile, I think that came up, you know, whether we can look at our advertising to see if, you know, it would be within the scope of advertising for a larger area to be considered by the board.
So that's the only way to ensure it is just by advertising?
So the way the amendments work, so we will be posting a staff report with proposed amendment text. And we'll do that approximately, or I should say at least 2 weeks before the Planning Commission public hearing. And so that's our staff recommendation. Now, of course, additional things may come up at the public hearings that can affect the amendment text ultimately. But then it's also has to be advertised in accordance with state code. And so that's where we put in these different advertised options. And that's where we want to make sure that the advertised options are broad enough so that the board can consider different things that may come up. So, you know, in this case, if we've only advertised up to, and that advertising is pretty specific, right? It says up to a half a mile. You know, we might need to make sure that the advertised range goes up to a mile to make sure that that's within the scope of advertising. But again, it wouldn't be necessarily the text that staff is putting forward, but it's something that you can make in your comments to the board, and it would be within their scope and their ability to modify it.
Okay, so any key factors that we want to bring up and any issues, we just bring it to, I guess, written form, either to you guys or the board?
So I will say as staff, we definitely want to hear your feedback, and I would appreciate, you know, if you have thoughts, go ahead and send them to that email address that we put in the chat. But if you want to make comments to the Planning Commission or the board, then you can do that in various ways. On the website, you can see where you can submit comments in writing. You can do video testimony. You can appear in person, or some combination of that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Another question in the chat. Why set size limits that are going to be routinely exceeded and allowed through special exceptions? Asking about the purpose of the size limits.
So the size limits are intended to, you know, we're thinking, all right, if it's under this size, then, you know, then it's more likely to fit in with that area and not need additional review. So it could be that by right use. Now, even by right uses have to meet all other standards in the zoning ordinance, as well as site plan review and so forth. So I don't want it to just, people sometimes think by right means just go out and build whatever you want. It definitely does not mean that. And so, for instance, the 80,000 square feet in the I2 and I3, those are industrial districts, and, it makes sense to allow an industrial use such as a data center there. And 80,000 square feet, coincidentally, or not coincidentally, perhaps, is the same size as our big box retail use. And then the 40,000 square feet in the C2 and C3, no, C3 and C4, sorry about that. That provides a smaller size because those are not industrial districts. Those are commercial office districts. But while often data centers are larger, sometimes they're not. So you could have a smaller data center that then could go in by right and fit in with that area.
Cynthia, would you like to unmute your mic? You have your hand raised. Cynthia?
All right, well, while she's
Yeah.
maybe checking on that, I do
Yeah.
want to say it's 101. And, so if we want to take one more, comment, but if you have additional questions or comments, like I said, staff, we'd love to hear from you. And you can send them to that email address, or you could even give us a call. And then also the other participation at the public hearings that I mentioned. So I don't know, you had, Janine, I think you had called to see if Cynthia could unmute.
Yes, but Cynthia hasn't unmuted yet. Let me see. Yeah. We do have another question in the chat though from Lisa. Could you please let me know what department or where I can get information on the type of environmental impact studies that are required before building infrastructure like data centers? And Lisa wants some information on if there are any environmental impact studies done on data centers and where they could be accessed.
I suppose it might depend on how it's coming through the process. So if it was coming through like an SC or as part of a rezoning, then, there are certain submission requirements and things that would be reviewed. And it also depends on its location. Even if it's coming in by right through the site plan review, they're going to be looking at all kinds of things, including, whether it's near RPA, resource protection area, floodplains, stormwater management comes into play. So the site plan submission process might also have a lot of information.
Thank you, Carmen. We have a question from Tyler as well in the chat, and then Candace has her hand raised, so then I'll switch over to Candace. But first, will these meetings result in changes to the staff recommendations?
Will these meetings result in changes? Maybe. We are definitely, listening to the feedback. We're gonna, put things together, and we'll be posting the staff report with proposed text, like I said, by May 22nd or before.
Cynthia said that it looks like she's not allowed to unmute. I'm not sure what the issue is there, but she's asking, can we require a letter or analysis from Dominion for any data centers?
Yeah, I'm not sure, Cynthia. I'm not familiar with that process. But if it's a suggestion, we'll take that as something to look into. But
Candace, would you like to unmute your mic?
Yes, that actually have a follow-on to the question about will there be changes with these meetings. So I was going to ask, how many comments, letters, emails, meetings will it take for them not to build these data centers near our homes and in like residential areas that are like so close to schools and neighborhoods and such?
I would just encourage that, as always, if you have concerns, then you can bring them to the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors to participate in the public hearing process. I don't know if there was maybe one more, Janine, but I think we're going to wrap up our session because we're over our time, and I want to be respectful for people's schedules.
Candace, just to wrap up, a good final question would be, how do we get this recorded meeting?
Yes, that's a good one. We will actually post it on the website. So it's on the project website. It'll be like right next to the meeting information. It'll probably, after this one, it might take a day or two, but then it'll be posted and it'll probably be shifted down on our webpage under like past meetings. So because it'll be over. Right now they're under upcoming, but they'll all be posted. So, well, thank you so much. As I said, thank you for coming to this meeting. And, I know everybody probably have other things they'd like to do over their lunch hour, but we appreciate your feedback. And if you have additional thoughts, please send us an email. All right. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.